Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back, Solo listeners. Thank you to those of you who have rated the podcast on iTunes and have been telling your single friends and family members. If you haven't, please help get the word out. This week's episode coincides with the launch of my new book, Shtick to Business: What the Masters of Comedy Can Teach You About Breaking Rules, Being Fearless, and Building a Serious Career. You can find it as a book, ebook, and Audible on Amazon. Keeping with that theme, I speak to two friends and entrepreneurs about tips for those of you who want to start a business or just want to get more out of your career. Each of us presents 3 tips for the entrepreneurial-minded listener, and we discuss special considerations for the solo entrepreneur. If you stick around till the end, for the bonus material, I cover a lesson from my book, where I talk about taking a bigger stage. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. My first guest is Julie Nervelli. Julie's an old friend who has been a guest co-host on 2 previous episodes. Today, she joins us as a contributor. Julie was born and raised in San Jose, California, and earned her college degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She has lived in Colorado for 16 years. Entrepreneurship is in Julie's blood. She grew up with parents who own multiple successful businesses. She's worked at most of them, starting at age 6.
Yes.
And
Slave labor.
And Julie has founded and sold 2 companies of her own. Welcome back, Julie.
Thank you.
My second guest, Darwin Metzger, is another friend and business partner from Los Angeles whom I met while researching my first book, The Humor Code. A former star of America Now and an Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, Darwin is the founder and CEO of Phantom, a digital marketing and social media strategy firm. Darwin works with brands, political campaigns, TV shows, films, and celebrities, including Nike, Trident, DirecTV, AT&T, Fox, and BBC America. And you can get to know him more from the I'm Not Joking episode titled The Unemployable Darwin Metzger.
Nice.
Welcome, Darwin.
Hey, boy. Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. Before we get started, what we're going to be doing today, actually, is we're going to be presenting 9 tips for entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs, and we're going to do 3 per person. But first, I want to spend a little time getting to know our guests. So let's start with Julie. So the regular listener knows you.
Yes.
Knows you a little bit.
Hello, regulars.
So knows you from episode 1 and then knows you from the more recent What is a Remarkable Life episode with Jill Cohen. And so, Julie, you are a single mom.
Yes.
Very active, very social, embracing your solo life. You have recently started a Carpe Diem solo group. What do you call it?
Carpe Diem, yes, on Facebook.
In Denver.
Yes.
And what prompted that?
So I was feeling like I needed a bigger network of people to do social activities with, because if my other single parent friends had their kids or my coupled up friends were spending time with their significant other, that I needed more, just a bigger network of people. So I decided to start this Carpe Diem group, invited a bunch of singles, have asked those people to invite others, and then you can just post, hey, I want to go catch some live music tomorrow night. Anybody want to join? And we've had some fun. It's still building momentum because it just launched it 2 months ago, maybe. But so far, we've had some great connections and done some fun things. And I think I'm going to have a party in the spring at my house and just have everyone who's in the group come over and have a good time.
That's great.
And my intention was not, for me personally, not to meet people to date, just to meet people to have fun with and mountain bike with and see live music with. I think other people in the group may have a different intention, but my personal intention was just to have a bigger network.
So no group sex.
Correct. Not my intention. I don't know what others.
I'd be more concerned about group texts. I'd rather avoid those if I could.
You know, it is interesting. I have put Darwin on group text reluctantly because I know how much he dislikes them.
If I have the opportunity, I will remove myself from these texts immediately.
As you should.
That's how you practice safe group text.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Abstinence. That's the only 100% safe method.
Yes. I think group texts are useful for like sometimes we do this weekend, this Vegas basketball weekend, and it's helpful to have the 4 or 5 people on.
Yeah,
for a short period of time.
If it's to generate an in real life moment. And by the way, I love your event because that's what you're doing, right?
Right.
Now, if we were just having a text message to shoot the shit and share memes, this is such a waste of time. But if it's for us to cultivate a small group experience, which again is what you're doing.
Yes.
And a lot of my advice, I think, sort of runs parallel to this for the rest of the podcast. I think as an example, most conventions and conferences are huge wastes of time. Having a group of 500 people listening to one person talk accomplishes nothing. But getting like-minded people together into small groups, whether it's to have fun or Peter often leads groups where they workshop ideas and dilemmas, this is where I think a lot of magic happens. So I'm a big fan of what you're doing.
Cool. Yeah, I love what you're saying too. Makes a lot of sense.
And we're actually, when we wrap this recording up, Julie and I are headed to a dilemma dinner, which I'm hosting tonight, which is exactly this business venture that Darwin and I are developing.
It's a big secret.
And it's not anymore.
It's fine. We can handle it. The world can't.
Sign up on the wait list if you want.
And so now, Julie, you recently sold a business, White Girl Salsa, and now you're working with an entrepreneur.
Yes.
In the meat industry.
Correct. Yes, we're an e-commerce marketing platform basically for small American ranchers. So all the beef is sourced in the U.S., which is not the case when you're buying beef from the grocery store, usually. I mean, quite a lot of it is not from the U.S. And so from the rancher's perspective, they have a larger outlet, a bigger platform to sell their amazing craft beef that is raised in great ways. And it's better for the animal, there's better nutritional value in the beef when it's raised in this way. And it's also better for the environment, not using feedlots and so forth.
As somebody who has a very beef-heavy diet, this is a very exciting idea.
Darwin just perked up a little bit.
I'm like, yeah, you guys can't tell, but I'm really leaning in a lot right now. And my chair's about to tip over.
So one of the fun things about Julie's new venture, you're doing basically marketing, branding, and so on work, business development work for this guy.
Yes, I do some operations, partnership relations. Yeah. I do.
It's fun to it's fun to hear the stories of them really bootstrapping the business model and trying stuff out and A/B testing and working out so it's they have the product, but they're just like, okay, we have this great value proposition, but how do we deliver it? It's really a distribution challenge.
Right. And distribution is expensive. So that's a lot of the margin challenge is how to get that distribution network minimalized.
And do you mean distribution on the marketing side or distribution on the actual logistics?
The logistics of shipping the product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so Darwin, I like having Darwin come in and speak to my MBAs. He's done this a couple times now because Darwin dropped out of his MBA program.
Oh, I love that.
And that's usually the first piece of advice or tip that he will give them is please drop out as soon as possible.
And so I think like there's this thing that's happened nowadays with the rise of, entrepreneurship, aside from on the dating apps, is this great thing, right? On the dating apps, it means you don't have a job. But
when you say you're an entrepreneur, that means you don't have a job.
Yeah, when guys say they're entrepreneur on the apps, it means they're in between jobs. But in the real world, being an entrepreneur is suddenly this, or not so suddenly, this very sexy thing. And so, what's better than getting an MBA from Stanford is dropping out of Stanford's MBA program to start your own business. And so there's sort of this profile. Well, there's two profiles of the person who drops out of an MBA program. There's the one who just can't hack it. And to be honest, that's actually rather rare. Almost everybody who gets admitted to an MBA program has the horsepower to get through it.
If you get that far.
Far. And then the programs aren't designed to weed people out. They're actually designed to get you through. And then there's the Darwin profile, the Metzger profile, which is you look around, you go, this isn't what I was expecting. What am I getting for my money? And going and already just working up business ideas, having this kind of thing going. And so Darwin dropped from this program and you moved to LA. You got a job and then you eventually moved to LA shortly thereafter.
January 2008. So you say 2008, 2008?
2008.
2008. That's when I came.
And you actually got one of your big time jobs in a very sort of offbeat entrepreneurial fashion.
Yeah, and I think this will be this sort of concept.
Should we hold this for your first tip?
No, I think it can set the table, and I think we'll come back to it. But this actually, you know what? I want to hold on to this story only because I realize it actually ties all three of the tips that I'm going to get together.
Good. I like a good cliffhanger. Yeah. I like some foreshadowing. So why don't I ask you this instead? What the hell does Phantom do?
Oh boy. This is not supposed to be a long episode. It's supposed to be a short episode.
Elevator pitch.
So the issue is usually I should have a really tight pitch. And we work with a lot of clients to make sure they have a very tight pitch. But because we do so many different things now that are completely custom one-off campaigns for completely unrelated clients, it doesn't make sense. We're generally brought in as an outsider with the idea of, we know you're an outsider. We want you to think about this from a completely different framework. I liken a lot of what we did to, there's a famous Soviet hockey coach named Tasarov. If you watch the ESPN 30 for 30 called Of Miracles and Men, that follows that Lake Placid Soviet team that loses to Team USA in the Miracle on Ice and sort of the aftermath of that loss. You learn essentially that the Soviet Union had no hockey program. They didn't know what they should do. So they hired this guy who they're just like, well, he's really smart. He's great at decoding things. Let's just send him to Canada. And he goes to Canada and realizes we'll never beat the Canadians playing hockey the way they play it. They've been doing this for decades. They're bred for this. So instead he goes then to New York and he goes to Broadway and he watches the ballet and he starts denoting all these different angles of choreography and all these different ways of grouping movements on a surface. And then he completely applied these outside ideas to the sport of hockey. And it obviously took it over by storm. This is the most dominant team of all time. And he was an undefeated coach as part of the Soviet program until they required him to throw a game against the then Czechoslovakian team because they were trying to lobby that country. And essentially he said, I'm not going to lose and I'm not going to tie. Said, if you want me to throw a game, you're going to have to fire me, which they did. Point long.
This is a long elevator ride.
Dang it. I was trying to shorten it with a metaphor, and then the metaphor required a lot of explanation. We basically get brought in typically to either TV networks, consumer good companies, or startups, and we basically figure out what's a strategic roadmap we can build for them, thinking from their business from a complete outsider point of view, and often it touches every department. Sometimes we focus on digital marketing and social media, which is what we're best known for. We have definitely cracked the code on most every digital platform. We invented Twitter brigading, which is sort of this concept of these fake accounts trying to goose conversation and direct a body of people towards one viewpoint or another. We were not doing it for political reasons.
Yeah, they were doing it. They were doing it before it became so distasteful.
We were doing it in the way you would imagine Stephen Colbert doing it. Fun and delightful and bringing smiles to people's faces. Yeah. So we have like a famous parody of Jesus called Jesus_M_Christ that Obama follows and Bieber follows and a lot of great comedians like Gervais follow. We also then cracked the code on an app called Vine, where we ended up helping build basically 18 of the top 25 Viners and then reinventing them as YouTubers and Instagrammers.
So Julie, I'm going to interrupt because Darwin told me this story recently where he does this on occasion where he says something spur of the moment. It's not planned and it's like just home run. And so he's with a client and they're talking about social media and these social media platforms and so on. And he basically says, we know the platform better than the platform.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a company that it's actually a company I'd really like Pete to be involved in. I'm not going to say their name right now, but I'll talk to you, Pete, offline about it because I don't want to blow them up. But essentially, they're trying to understand. They're like, okay, we know we like you guys. We know you're onto something, but why would we work with you versus this other group? Mm-hmm. And the quote that I said was, because that group knows the platform better than you know it. We know the platform better than the platform knows it.
Love that.
That's the value proposition.
There's your elevator pitch.
There you go.
But the problem is that's a little narrow. So that's more of a case study than it is what their strategies. Because Phantom doesn't just do social media work. They do product work They do a bunch of other things.
I sort of describe it as there's coders and there's decoders. We basically just have a team of creative directors / decoders, and you could put us in front of any problem and we'll figure out a way to reverse engineer it in a more like convergent way that's more like traditional, but then we also can come up with these divergent methods that nobody's thought of and completely tackle it from a new angle.
The only company that I think of that people know that Phantom reminds me of is IDEO. So IDEO is a product design firm, but they don't specialize in any sort of product. So you bring them a toothbrush, you bring them a shopping cart, you bring them an automobile, you bring them a theme park, and they have a process by which they're going to make that thing better and more novel. And so that's my best. Maybe there's a...
I love that analogy. I think the other layer on top is we operate in stealth. We build a lot of things behind the scenes. We don't acknowledge our work. We don't accept.
It's called Phantom. That's why I push it like, what the hell do you do?
Right.
For years, they didn't even have a website.
Oh.
There was no
So
social
Phantom.
media presence. They now have a website, and it's
the least amount of website you could possibly have for this sort of business.
And we should jump into the tips because that's actually related to one of my tips. So,
Okay, this reminds me of something though. My dad is one of my biggest role models, and for entrepreneur, he's owned many, 15, 16 different successful businesses. And ever since I was a kid, he would say, don't be a sheep, don't follow the crowd, don't do what everybody else is doing. And this is reminding me of Phantom. You're doing it differently and not doing what everyone else does, and I love that.
All right, good. So let's just get going. That's why people are listening. They want their 9 tips for the solo entrepreneur or the aspiring entrepreneur. And so I think we'll start. We're going to go counterclockwise, and we're going to start with Julie.
Can I ask something first, though?
Yeah, of course, please.
Is there a distinct difference between the solo entrepreneur and the coupled up entrepreneur? In terms of how they attack being an entrepreneur? Because I think there are. I don't know if that's relevant to this conversation.
It is. Actually, it was. So that's actually our listener question for the week. And so let's do the listener question before we get into the tips.
Oh, got locked in.
I think that matters. So this listener question actually doesn't have a name associated with it because it's been asked to me in a variety of ways by a variety of different people. And so the question is, it's actually it has 2 elements to it. So the first part is, do I quit my job to go all in on my entrepreneurial venture, or do I keep my job and work on it on the side? And then what's interesting is that question is asked to me by someone who might be married, with or without children, or might be solo. And I think, and the answer to that question depends a little bit on the circumstance and also a variety of things. So you two are, my experts. What's your reaction to that question and those conditions?
So the first question was, should I quit my job to start the entrepreneur?
To go all in.
Go all in. And again, I think that's why this is the difference between solo or coupled up is that depends on what are your resources to quit your job and start a business. Mm-hmm. So if you're coupled up, does that person make enough money to support you jointly while you're working on this venture? If you're solo, do you have access to money you can borrow to quit your job sooner and go all in? So I think it really depends on your situation. And
I like to say your burn rate.
Your burn rate, right. Or can you tighten up the spending and save money that way and things like that. So you have to look at the options. Another point would be, is time to market of the essence? Do you need to get your idea to market quickly? Is it a big idea before somebody else does? And if it is that type of idea, then, this is a big conversation, obviously. Do you have access to investment money and things like that?
So I think this is such a complicated question because
it is.
For starters, if you have children and you need to pay for your children to have food and healthcare or whatever, I can't imagine I would give you advice to quit your job until you have enough burn rate, which usually my recommendation is you need to have 6 months of burn rate saved up in cash anyways.
Just for emergencies.
For emergencies. What if you get in a car accident? What if you get fired from your job? Who knows what can happen? Now, if you're trying to create a new company and you're going to lose all of your revenue from whatever businesses that you've quit or your job that you've quit, I think you probably have to have more like 18 months cash. And that's a lot of cash, and most people aren't going to have that. So I think in most circumstances, I'm still going to recommend to people they keep their job while they launch this business. And I'm abundant-minded. I think you can do both. There's no such thing as too busy. You can always squeak more hours in, and you can find more efficient ways to do the job you're doing and squeeze that time in. I know people like to point out most great companies are started by a founder who that was all they had on their plate, but also want to point out examples like Uber. Travis Kalanick was absolutely doing multiple other jobs at the same time. So it's totally doable. I love your advice about how sensitive the timing is to market. And if someone's going to beat you to the punch, you better be all in. And the opposite end of this sort of advice is the Peter Dinklage model. I don't know if you heard that story that he told his first agent, I'm not doing anything else for work. So if you want me to eat this month, I hope you book me something because I'm not buying anything with $1 I do from anything other than acting.
Yeah, that's the sort of no plan B setup. So obviously the premise, I'm most interested in advice for solo entrepreneurs because that's who's that's for the most part who's listening. Actually, we do have married and partnered listeners.
Hi, married folk.
But I think that this, to me, the premise is that, when you are on your own, especially without children, you can lever up the risk in many ways. Not totally, right? Because, in some ways, the ideal situation is you're partnered and you have a hedge, right? So one goes all in and one has the government job that's totally safe. But there is a sort of element of, especially removing the children, that allow you to have more of an opportunity that if you do want to go all in. What's interesting is, the base rates for failure are so high. In some ways, it suggests the sort of, there's a book called The 10% Entrepreneur that's built on this, self-hedge. You keep the day job, you curtail it. Maybe you're a little less ambitious. You even use some of the resources, your office, the fluorescent lights, the printer, etc. And you spend, nights and weekends, mornings, and, time to do this secondary activity.
I believe you need $0 to start almost every business on earth. And I've yet to see an example where you couldn't start the business with an email account and a phone and a piece of paper and a pen. I really don't see anyone who needs to raise money for any idea. If it's a good enough idea and you spend your own blood, sweat, and tears building it out, you will get somebody to invest and cover the cost of it. What I cannot figure out, though, is what do you do in the meantime to pay rent and those other bills? Unless, again, you either have a passive income stream or you have that burn rate that, you have enough runway to live off of.
Yeah, it's true. And I think you're right that now more than ever, there's opportunities to develop ideas and test those ideas with very little overhead. And really, when you think about most entrepreneurial ventures, most don't go anywhere. You work on the idea and then you go, pass. You work on the idea, you go, pass. And then at some point you are so compelled, the market speaks, and you say, well, I got to start spending more money in order to make more money. Julie, you look like you want to say something.
I was thinking about my second company I started. My daughter was 11 months old, and I was basically a stay-at-home mom starting my second company. And so I did have the safety net of being married at that time. But if I had a job, so if I didn't have a child and I had a full-time job, it was sort of where I was easing my way into the business. I didn't work on it full-time. Mm-hmm. So I was exploring it and starting to build it and research it and things like that. And so, like you said, I started it with no money because I was doing research and figuring out how to produce it and how to get ingredients and all of those types of things.
And by the way, I love the idea of parents from home raising a child and launching companies. I'm actually surprised we don't prescribe that more, whether it be a stay-at-home dad or a stay-at-home mom for those periods of time. It's so valuable. You need that level of flexibility anyways. And obviously you have to pay attention to your child. But I think you can do both. I mean, you've proven that you can do both.
Well, and I needed an out. I couldn't be just a stay-at-home mom. I needed to be doing something productive. Well, you're productive as a mother. I needed to use my brain in different ways and challenge myself in different ways besides
you needed to make things, create things.
I needed to be creative.
Julie and I, in the previous episode, I laid out my create more than you consume idea. And then since then, I keep pointing out all the ways that Julie has been creating things her entire life. And, being drawn to that. Yeah. Okay. So let me try to sum up the way what I'm actually hearing here is that there's this idea of that most of the time you don't need to go all in. You probably shouldn't be going all in because you have to actually make sure that the idea is worth going all in.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, you described it in a sense. The moment where it's time to go all in is when the market is pulling this idea that you've spent time cultivating and they want it more than you even think they want it. That's your red flag to say, okay.
Now it's time.
Yep.
Yes.
And that could be because all of a sudden the growth rate on users spikes. All of a sudden you get a big sales contract you weren't expecting. The market will give you signs that this business is starting to work. If you realize nobody cares and you're having to
push.
Yeah, the second you have to sell $1 bills for 25 cents, it's okay, this business is DOA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but most people don't have the ego to admit that. And that's why I don't think they also then have the quietness to accept or to see when they finally are being pulled into the market that, yes, this is the right idea. People are bad curators, I think, in general. They don't prioritize their time well, and they don't know how to curate their best ideas and just go all in with those.
Yeah. So I like this idea of, and I think this is going to be reflected in the tips, is about developing ideas and giving yourself a chance to see how strong it is before you put yourself into a no plan B situation.
It's like a first date. It's an asymmetrical bet. If you're building an idea that takes no money to start building, it's just your time and thought, and you basically say, okay, cool, at some point this isn't working out. It's just like a first date. But if you're quitting your job to just do it, that's like getting engaged to somebody before you even know them.
Yes.
It's a similar misstep, but this is how we prescribe it typically.
Okay, so the answer is don't have children. First.
That helps.
So A, don't have children. B, work on the idea. C, pay attention to the market.
Yeah, but she's proven, though. She's proven. If you have children, you can still do this.
Although it does help to have a partner who's... Yeah. Look, that's the argument for marriage. The best argument for marriage is children.
But they're expensive. On your other podcast, was that the Money Amy podcast?
It was the Money Amy podcast where I went to town on this financial benefits of marriage idea.
And the cost to raise a child was?
It's minimum $250,000 to age 18.
Yeah, imagine investing that in a business.
Wow. Well, imagine investing that in just the S&P 500, which makes approximately 10% a year, which means every 7 years that would double. So 7 years after, that'd be worth $500,000. 14 years after, that'd be $1 million right there.
And by the way, when you're wealthy, it doesn't stay $250,000. It goes up, right?
Because you just spend more.
You just spend more on your children because it's $250,000 is based upon people's means. They would like to spend more on their children. People would spend all their money on their kids if they could because of the nature of children.
People would spend all their money on their dogs if they could.
That's true.
So to the young solo listeners, you can really think about that in a very cerebral way of having children versus not having children.
And again, this is about people walking different paths. So the story, and I've told it before, I'll tell it again. When I was doing a master's degree at Rutgers right after my undergrad, and it was just mostly to get some additional training and to set myself up for a PhD program. So it was a very theoretical program, a very academic program. But I had a bunch of friends who were in this human resource program, which was very business focused. They have all gone on to work at major companies, and they are incredibly affluent as a result of it. They also are all married, all have children, and all also are have very luxurious tastes now, which tends to happen. They used to talk about starting their own business, about going into partnerships with each other. That has never happened, and I don't think ever will, because now they're at a point where they can't turn the spigot off and take on that kind of risk. And so there is something about while you're, young, wild, and free to think about these kinds of moments. So, all right. So let's, with that in mind, let's put Julie on the clock.
Okay.
For your first tip.
So my first tip, I'll start with this one just because it sort of relates to what we have been talking about, and then it won't take a ton of time. But if you're a solo entrepreneur, I think it's really important to stay balanced and to have fun. Because if you're coupled up, that sort of inherently forces you to take time to spend time with your coupled up person. And so I just think it's really important you could just work all the time. I mean, when you're in business for yourself, you just can work literally all the time. So I think balance is important, and making sure you're having fun and a release.
Okay, so I haven't mentioned this yet, but the timing of this podcast coincides with the launch of my new book. So
Congratulations.
I'm going to shamelessly self-promote for a second.
Hashtag humble brag.
This is a brag. It's a shameless self-promotion. So the book is called Shtick to Business: What the Masters of Comedy Can Teach You About Breaking Rules, Being Fearless, and Building a Serious Career. And I wrote the book for two types of people. For the person in a normal kind of traditional organizational structure who wants to get more out of their career, or for someone who's entrepreneurial minded. And one of the lessons is called Work Hard or Hardly Work. And it's this idea about thinking about your approach almost like a barbell. On one side is the intense focus necessary to solve major problems and to develop things and to be focused and working on a consistent basis. And then the idea that you release yourself. So I talk about you protect time, you grind, and then you release. And that release is not scrolling through Instagram while you're at your desk. That release is you get some sunshine, you go to the pool, you see friends.
And then you go back through Instagram and you scroll. Right on.
And so I like that idea that, there's very few Elon Musks in the world who can seemingly work all the time and will say, my girlfriend had to come and sleep on the couch in the office if she wanted to see me. There's still a moment of like, we will break down if we don't have human contact, if we don't get sun, if we don't get exercise, and so on. So I like the fact that you're just like, there's a limit to.
Yeah. And you can just be, there's a lot of stress involved, you sleepless nights and wondering how you're going to pay the bills and things like that. So
anxiety,
it's really important to have a release for that.
What's your sort of go-to release?
Mine is mountain biking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I forget about everything that's happening and I'm focusing on what I'm doing, and it puts me instantly in a good mood. No matter what is going on, I can go for a mountain bike ride and I feel great afterwards.
There is something to be said about a release that doesn't allow you, not always, but at times to let your unconscious mind do work, but not your conscious mind. Mm-hmm. Like when you're going down a hill on a mountain.
Yeah, you have to focus on just that.
That's exactly right. It's why a lot of middle-aged men like golf so much, because it has these moments of time where you're staring at that ball and all you want to do is hit it straight. I'm not a golfer, but I know enough about it to know that
you should hit the ball straight.
That you want to hit the ball straight, and how incredibly difficult it is to hit the ball straight, and how you'll never hit the ball straight if you're thinking about your meeting on Thursday. And so it gets you outside. It's social. It's green. You know what I mean? And then you have these moments, these sort of meditative moments.
And you get to hold shiny weaponry.
Right.
I'm not advocating golf, but I'm saying there are these useful releases. What is your go-to release, Darwin?
This is really hard for me to say. And I was going to ask you, if you are mountain biking once a week, is this something you let yourself do sort of sporadically through the week? I don't know, other than food for sure. I love to eat, and I consider food a release for me, and I eat very well every day, virtually every meal. I do work out 5 to 6 times a week.
I think that counts.
Typically lifting heavy or doing yoga as sort of an augment to lifting heavy. And then I try to turn off work as best I can on Friday night, and I will generally try to not pick it up in an intense way until Sunday night, when I engage in what Pete knows as Shmonday, which is more or less a full work day that begins about 6 p.m. in the evening on Sundays and can often go until 3 in the morning, Monday morning, to make sure that everybody on my team is ahead of schedule the next day.
So my version of Shmonday starts at 3, 4, 5 and is somewhere between 3 and 6 hours. And the idea is what Shmonday does. And again, that's what a gift that a solo person has.
Right.
Is that they can say, Sunday night is designed to get through my inbox, to plan my week, to do the admin. So then Monday morning, I can be creative and I can make stuff.
Nothing fights the Sunday scaries like just battling against all the things you're afraid of on Monday and just getting it done right here and now and waking up on Monday looking forward to Monday.
Yes.
That's a gift. And that's what Shmonday accomplishes for me.
I love that. Is that a tip? Is that one of your tips?
That should be. That wasn't. That's
it's
a
not
bonus
even
tip.
as a bonus tip.
People, Shmonday. All right, time's up. Darwin.
So when I was thinking about my 3 tips, the first thing I did was go back and reference.
By the way, Shmonday is spelled S-Monday. Shmonday.
That's how Pete spells it. Pete and I spell it differently.
Oh, how do you spell it?
I spell it S-C-H
It
Monday.
sounds like it has a sh in it. The words would be Monday.
Exactly. Thank you so much for backing me up.
But there's
on
no
that.
CH in Sunday or Monday.
You know, there's some creative license in this world, Pete, and that's what we're taking right now.
That, by the way, that's the difference between Darwin and I. Right there. I'm like, no, CH.
Right.
He's much more practical and concrete. I'm definitely
Darwin, you're on the clock.
Take some creative license. So when I came up with my tips, I first started by referencing a tweet from a few years ago, which I'm frantically scrolling.
I was like, what is he scrolling? Are your
well,
notes
I had
that
it up
long?
and it just went away, where I had ranked every job I've ever had. And the first thing I wanted to contemplate was, what was the difference between the job that I ranked as being my favorite job, which is being a founder, and what was the job that I'd ranked as being my worst job, which in this case was being a hockey referee. But I've done so many things. I'm just quickly rattle them off. And it's going to start from the best to the worst, okay? Founder, app builder, Twitch streamer, TV personality, journalist, TV producer, actor, ghostwriter, eBay store seller, camp counselor, poker player, cookie delivery driver, hockey scorekeeper, courier, HVAC filter salesman, broker's assistant, shoe salesman, Santa's helper, bed salesman, ice cream scooper. Used to have to clean Black Widows out of semi-truck trailers, TV and film audience recruiter, and then last hockey referee. Now, to me, the commonalities with the jobs at the top that are amazing are that I did not wait for permission for these jobs. I created these opportunities.
Oh, that's nice.
Whereas the jobs I hate the most were the ones where I was within a system, and this is the best that system had to offer me, which means you're treated the worst, you're paid the least, and essentially valued the least. So,
hence, this is why the I'm Not Joking podcast with Darwin's called The Unemployable Darwin Metzger. He doesn't play well in those organizations.
Look, I think I'm particularly unemployable, but I believe everybody's unemployable to some degree, and other people are just more tolerant with the pain being employed means for them. I have no tolerance for it. So my advice, or my first tip, is stop waiting for permission from your boss or company to get the job you want, and just create it or demand it. That sort of action will take you so much further. There is no dream job out there. I promise you, there's no dream CMO, CEO job waiting for you. You cultivate and create that job for yourself. If you think you are overqualified for the job you have within a company, you should start doing the work of whatever you think is above your pay grade, and then bring that body of work to the board or to your boss and say, I'm doing the job, start paying me like it, or I'm going to go elsewhere and do it. Now, you definitely have to not be risk adverse. That's going to be true for all the tips that I'm going to give today.
I think one thing we should agree on is that you have to have a risk-seeking personality to some degree, and it helps to be what I call promotion-focused, focus on achievement, if you're going to get into an entrepreneurial venture.
I'd love to comment on that.
Please.
I was doing some consulting for this gentleman was an investor into a business, and his background was financial planning. The founder of the business had literally a mental breakdown and was no longer involved in the business. So this investor took over the business. So normally financial planning people are very not risk takers. And I saw the struggle that the business had because he wouldn't take risks. And I felt like with someone who was more willing to take risks, the business could have been hugely successful. And he was just so conservative that it really, I think that, I don't want to say failure because it's still in business, but
It's dying.
You have to be able to take
Look,
risks.
there's two types of founders. There is like that operational founder that's just great at dotting the I's and crossing the T's and keeping the trains on track, and that's wonderful. But those people do not create new ventures unless they're paired with the other type of founder, which is that swashbuckling pirate who's willing to like jump in, do something that without permission. And again, I don't know why I keep going back to Travis Kalanick from Uber. Uber, whose current CEO, Dara, came from Travelocity or Expedia or whatever. He's a brilliant man. He would have never created that company. They needed a founder who was willing to piss off a bunch of people and crack a bunch of eggs to make that omelet. And in the example of the founder that you're talking about, Julie, that's somebody that founder should be seeking out. And by the way, these are great pairs. If you find yourself to be more of a visionary who is not afraid of risk and who does have bold ideas, but you're not great at operations, find that operational partner to let them take over that role, and vice versa. If you know you love to see how things are organized and you're more thoughtful, but you're afraid of risk, bring somebody in who's going to push you to your edges.
Yeah. So in Shtick to Business, I talk about this idea of job crafting. And so there's the job description that HR gives, and then there's the job you really do, and then there's the job you're really rewarded for. And so there's a whole literature in organizational behavior about people crafting their own jobs, and in terms of focusing on different things. And then what you're saying is, even if you're working within an organizational structure, is making the case for you to be doing different things and thus more rewarding things that are both beneficial to the business and to you. That's the key.
If you're a swashbuckling sort of founder, no organization that very few are set to reward those people and acknowledge their contributions. And that's for sure. That's your sign to get out of there.
My reaction to what you just said, Julie, is with failure rates as high as they are for business, people want to play things safe. The actual reaction is you have to actually play things more risky because chances are you're going to fail anyways. And the way that you can maximize success is to go
risks.
Bigger, different, and so on. Okay, great. Time's up. Mine is drawn from the book, of course, and I'm going to go with a different one as a different flavor, but you actually alluded to it earlier, Darwin, and this comes from chapter 4, which is titled Write It or Regret It. And in the chapter, I make a case for people in business to have a writing practice. And so one of my friends and Julie's friends, and Darwin, you met her too at a Dilemma Day, Rachel Beisel, said that she read an advanced copy of the book. She says, I've read 100 business books, at least, maybe 200. She's like, I've never read a business book that puts forth a case for writing. And what I want to say is, if you have an idea, before you do anything, write it down. And so I'm in love with the one-pager. See, every idea I have, every business idea, every academic paper, I write a one-pager. And in it, I set up the problem, set up the target, set up the idea, and see, can I write a persuasive, something that can persuade me that this is a big idea and worth doing. Most of the time, I go, and I just set it aside.
Once you've written it, and really, that helps you solidify the thought process about the idea.
That's exactly right. So we write things down to record our ideas. Right? So comics do this all the time. They carry around a notebook. They're constantly recording ideas. Most of those things don't do anything, but occasionally it's useful. And now you have it. It's on paper. It doesn't get lost. You don't forget it. You write things to clarify ideas. So the act of it's easy to be loose with your talking. It's very hard to be loose with your writing. And then
this is why Donald Trump doesn't publish a lot of papers.
He's a good talker.
Yeah.
But the writing is what matters when you want to develop an idea. And then what the cool thing about the one sheet or the one pager is, I'm holding up a one page right now, is once you're okay with it, once you go, oh, I'm going to now do this. So I wrote a one pager for solo, for example, is then it becomes a communication document. And so now you can share it with people. And so what I did was, once I had written it, I started sharing it with people to get their feedback. The copy in the one pager became copy for this website, or for this podcast, and so on and so forth. So I say, write it or regret it.
I also like that it forces you to confront your idea, because maybe that idea isn't that good. And until I'm able to reread my own thoughts and just like really see it, it's easy for memory to just sort of trick you into thinking, I think that sounded good. But when I get to reread the actual idea and I have to now come to terms with, is this actually worth taking a step forward with or not? I like that because it just takes you out of the purgatory, which is, I think, what happens to a lot of would-be entrepreneurs. They kind of have a half idea. It's not that great, but it's not bad enough for them to acknowledge to just move on and try a new thing. And I love that writing it down, I think, forces you into the right action.
And it's one page. It's not 30 pages. Like, you don't need long business plans. You don't need deep marketing plans. It's tight. So what's interesting is Bezos and Amazon, when someone comes up with a new product idea, what they're charged with doing is to write the press release. So they write the press release. Is it newsworthy? Can they identify the target? Is there a value proposition? If you can't write a press release for this new product that pops, why would you ever do it? Okay, time's up. Julie, on to your second tip.
As we're having this conversation, my brain is just being flooded with more and more tips. But what I have down is create a support network, because being an entrepreneur can be lonely. It can be scary, and that support network. I was mainly thinking of other entrepreneurs where you can bounce ideas off of, maybe, and even in the ideation phase, you might join a trade association where other people are in this industry, and that helps you not only learn about the industry, but connect with people and hear their challenges and know, how am I going to address those challenges in a different way? And so I think that's a really great form of education. And then also navigating that industry. So as you meet other founders and other entrepreneurs, what do you do about this? How do you handle this? I thought about this. I ran into this problem. And so just being able to have someone who gets what you're doing to be able to bounce ideas off of and work through issues, I think, is important with that, having a support network.
Indeed. Well, I mean, one of my favorite business books is The E-Myth, is the challenges that entrepreneurs have. You know, Mary's good at making pies. Everybody tells Mary, you should go into the pie business. Mary doesn't know shit about finance, accounting, or anything else. And so either Mary needs to read a bunch of books or lean on other people or hire other people. Like, you need help to execute ideas.
Yeah. And that's almost a different, that's hiring your team. Like you were saying, if you're not good at accounting, hire somebody to do the accounting. If your best use is sales and marketing, that's how you should spend your time. And this tip that I'm talking about is definitely more in the support. I see. It's not like a board advisor. Of hire. Yeah. Sort of more to bounce ideas off of, or to spend time working through ideas. I see. So less for hire, but more supportive.
I think, your point, Julie, Pete, the point you just made, ultimately the tip I'm about to give next, they all sort of, to me, synergize together. And essentially what we're really saying is take advantage of human-powered opportunities. I think when people want to start a new business, the first thing they're thinking of, and this sort of goes back to what I was already saying, I need to raise money now. I'm going to need money for this. Really, you will always need more humans than anything. And I love the idea of workshopping ideas in small groups, as I mentioned before. And in a sense, that's part of what you're talking about. No great idea was cultivated by one person and one person alone. And if it's a group of people that are identical and have nothing that they fill in the gaps for one another, that business is going to fail as well. So I think also adding the sort of the twinge of, you need to find people that think a little bit differently than you, but that you still share common grounds, whether that's ethically or on your vision. My tip, which I think maybe I should just segue into, is to tell people exactly what you envision for yourself and ask for their help in achieving that vision. And what I've come to learn over time is that in my mind, somebody should like me more if I offer them advice. What is actually true is if I ask them for advice, they're way more likely to like me and way more likely to help me. So I think you and I are sort of, Julie, talking about the same thing, which is, how do we get support from other people to help move our visions forward? And I love by starting off by saying, here's what I'm going to do. And if I have ideas for that person as to how they fit in, so that they don't have to do all the mental math on their own. And better yet, if I have a way that me getting what I want also dovetails with them getting what they want and brings them value, then you'll start to see momentum really build. And that's my second tip.
So that I swear Darwin hasn't read Shtick to Business, but I have this element within the book about the myth of the lone genius, and that really that what often looks like lone genius is really group genius. Even if an individual comes up with a creative idea, you need people to execute the idea. So there's this idea is so old it's become a proverb, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others.
It just gets hidden because oftentimes the CEO is often like the singer of a band. They're much more front and center, so you notice them. You don't realize how great the guitar complemented that vocal or whatever. And I can't think of Steve Jobs without thinking about Wozniak. I can't think about Mark Zuckerberg without thinking about Sheryl Sandberg. And that's why they've created such behemoth companies that keep, typically if you do have a company that does have one swashbuckling X-Factor founder and nobody else that's really a true co-founder, that company is done the second that founder's gone. The companies that tend to survive over time tend to have a band behind them.
There's this great article, I'll put it in the exhibits, from TechCrunch, where the author did an analysis of successful companies. So this was built from a sort of VC perspective, like what are the kind of firms you should put your money into? And there's a bit of myth busting in it. And so first of all, it's not the 20-something founder who's often successful. It's the 30-something founder who's often already had a business venture or two. And what's interesting is co-founders usually fare better than single founders. And I think it's for the reasons that we talk about, this idea of complementing each other. And
if you have opposing perspectives, where those co-founders find agreement tends to be the strongest idea. Whereas if you don't have somebody else to push back and say, I don't know if that's the best angle, you just go with what you think works the best, and oftentimes that gives you a worse result.
Yeah, there's enough. And so, in comedy, there's the classic double act. That is, so Martin and Lewis and, Laverne and Shirley and Abbott and Costello, right? You have the straight and the clown. And, those two together make better comedy than two clowns or two straights. And, an improv group does well with, as Billy Merritt would say, with pirates and robots. The idea that you have both kind of these swashbucklers and more analytical folks. And so this notion of complementation is quite nice.
This is the situation I'm in now with Rancher is the name of the company, RANCHR. It's such a
classic.
I didn't come up with the name, but
you could have asked us to guess the name, and we would have guessed it.
Yeah. Exactly. So the founder is in the Bay Area, and he has worked for eBay and Levi Strauss and huge companies. And when he brought me aboard, I bring this very different perspective than he does. And
small, grassroots,
scrappy. Yes. I mean, it's been so interesting. We complement each other very well. And, he's like, we have to get stuff printed. I don't know. I got it. I'm like, I've done everything. I know how to get this done.
They're both so important, by the way, because to me, I'm much more like you. I'm much more grassroots and guerrilla and scrappy. And those are, I think, the mindsets that generally have new, bold ideas or help build new, bold ideas. However, I also need to have people that know how to work inside of these large bureaucratic organizations to get things done. I do not have the patience or the skill set. So it sounds like a great partnership between the two of you.
Yeah, it works wonderfully. It's great.
Yeah, I think that idea is you have enough in common and share enough of a shared perspective that you get along and you can move things forward, but you see things differently enough that you have better, more creative execution. Mm-hmm. All right, so mine is, I have so many I could choose from. I'm going to go with, actually it's the first idea that I had when I started to work on Shtick to Business. And it came out of my observation of watching comics, especially watching stand-up in terms of the punchline for jokes, but also can be the premise for a comedy sketch or even a movie. And that's called the reversal, or what I say to people, reverse it. And so to produce an opposing perspective in comedy is a great way to make people laugh. So, Anthony Jeselnik has this joke. He says, my parents were really strict. They caught me smoking a cigarette. They made me smoke an entire pack of cigarettes in one sitting to demonstrate the value of brand loyalty. or thereabouts.
Right.
I can't do the joke complete justice. and said in that very Jeselnicky fashion. Right? So everybody's thinking why they would have their kid smoke an entire pack, and yet this reversal. And so when you start thinking about some great businesses, successful businesses, they often have this. People don't typically think in reverse. Comics think in reverse naturally, or they learn it Comedy 101. And so, for example, back in this is pre-CrossFit, pre-Orange Theory, all this kind of stuff. The fitness industry was about, it's never been so easy to get into shape. 8-minute abs, 7-minute abs, 6-minute abs, 5-minute abs, right? This kind of thing. But all of us know there's no such thing as an easy way to get into shape. And so along comes Tony Horton, who had been working to get fit as an actor, a comedian, and so on, and started training musicians. So he actually got Tom Petty into shape before a concert, then worked with Annie Lennox, Bruce Springsteen, and so on. And, these were hard workouts, riding the bike, hitting the heavy bag, calisthenics, and all this kind of stuff. So he got hired by Beachbody, and he created P90X. Right? So P90X is not easy. It's not difficult. It's insanely difficult. And P90X sold 4 million DVD copies. It was the most pirated DVD of the day because it offered something that no one else was offering, which was real results. It headed in the opposite direction.
I paid for my P90X.
Ah, very nice. Tony appreciative of that.
I paid for my Susan Powder VHSs.
I paid for my shake weight.
But then P90X was, they wanted to even up that, right? And then they came out with
Insanity, right? So my other favorite example of this in the book is, how do you outsmart Apple and Samsung in the smartphone market?
You go opposite on privacy and you come out with a phone where everything you do is broadcast to everyone all the time, including the CIA?
No, not exactly. You create the dumb phone.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's better.
What these two Brooklyn-based entrepreneurs did. And they bootstrapped it, put it on Indiegogo, and exceeded 5 times their funding goal on Indiegogo. They created a phone for people who don't want to be more connected, but for people who want to be less connected. And so I always ask, can you ask questions in reverse? All right. So, how do we cut costs? I say, try to answer that question, but say, how can we increase costs? Right? How do we acquire new customers? Ask, how do we cut new customers? Darwin is smiling right now. I
just have a stupid idea. Keep going.
Okay.
Don't let me disrupt.
So for example, I think oftentimes people think in reverse and they don't even know they're thinking in reverse. So I met Darwin at an improv class. He has this background in comedy. And right, so everybody's coming up with these big, bold websites, deep, tons of information, content marketing, all this kind of stuff. And what Phantom does is go, everybody has a big, bold, everybody's broadcasting with you. We're heading in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm. Reverse it.
And so reverse it is my tip. That won't always yield a good idea, but it certainly can. And built on reverse it, I've come up with something I call shitstorming, which is a reverse brainstorm.
Just come up with the worst ideas you can possibly come up with.
Exactly.
I love it.
So I have you'll be able to go to the website and download the workbook to get access to how to do a shitstorming task.
The workbook for Shtick to Business.
You two are very kind. Okay.
Pros over here.
Julie, your third tip.
So I'm sure many people
and final.
This is final. I'm sure many people will disagree with me on this tip.
Good. I like that.
Yes.
Ooh.
I was at a trade show, and I'm in the natural food industry was the business I sold. And I see a brand founder I know, and he comes running up to me. You gave me the best advice I've ever gotten. And I said, really? What was it? I don't even know what I said. And it was take money when people want to give it to you.
Mm.
And again, this is my experience. It's in my industry, but it could apply to others. And I think the phenomena is when you're on fire and you're the talk of the town, that's when people want to get involved. And when you misforecast how much money you need, and you're thinking you're going to be okay.
And you're desperate.
And you're trying to stretch it, and then you're desperate, and then you need money?
No one. It's like dating.
Right.
When you're desperate, no one wants to give it to you. When you don't want it, that's when people want to go out with you.
Right. So the idea is, I think, and again, talking about this other founder who was not wanting to take risks, he was weighing, I think, too much on equity. I want 100% equity. Well, you're going to have 100% of a very small business. And if you bring on investors and take money and really grow this thing, you could have a smaller piece of a huge business. So that's my advice, is maybe not always just take the money, but really think about taking the money when people want to give it to you.
Yeah, having 100% of a dead company is worse than having 10% of a enormous company.
Ego kills a lot of businesses. The ego is so damaging, and anybody who wants to have 100% of anything, I just think they're being so short-sighted, because they should also want that company to live on beyond them, and that's impossible if you own 100%. It just is. And I also think this reminds me of another mindset that I either want in a single founder or I want a founder team to have, is I want them to simultaneously be so ambitious and so optimistic that they're going to become $1 billion company that's just guaranteed. And at the same time, I want them paranoid they're going to run out of money today. I want them to have both of those completely contradictory mindsets at the same time. And if you can get a team that can hold both of those at the same time, they'll usually make progress.
That's fine.
Makes sense.
It's interesting. This is built a little bit on Reverse It. Is everybody thinks about how you're trying to reduce your burn rate. So as you two know this, and probably the listeners are starting to pick this up with me. I have this kind of day job as a professor, but then I have all these like sort of side hustles, and I have the great luxury of that they don't have to make money because I have got this regular thing. But I'm starting to think like, they should make money. Like, why not? Like, why work for free and so on? And so what I'm starting to think about is like, oh, maybe I'm not investing enough into these things. You know what I mean? Like, how might, if I just pick an arbitrary number that might be even a little painful to write the checks for, what I might be able to do with it.
Right. And I think what we were talking about earlier is that tipping point of when the market is pulling it from you. And the thing I thought of was this solo podcast, the comments you've been getting and the momentum and the growth and the word of mouth. It's like the market is pulling that, and it's beyond what you expected. It
is, I have to say, look, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's unlike anything I've done before. Anything. Just like I get a call, I get an email, I get someone saying I want to volunteer. You know what I mean? And the other one is the word of mouth. So if you're listening and you like this podcast, I encourage you to tell people about it, especially the people who you think it might help. So I have a friend who went on 3 dates in one day. Okay. So this is obviously someone who is an appealing individual, and told each of his dates about solo.
Nice.
That's, first of all, that's bold.
Yeah, right.
But, that's a neat, that someone feels compelled to talk about it. So that's the question, is like, I need to think a little bit about like, okay, if maybe, I'm already obviously spending money to produce this and so on. I should be like, okay, what might be a reasonable, with the market speaking, what's a reasonable thing to spend money on?
Just reverse it and charge people to be there. What do you call the person who officiates your wedding? Officiator?
Yes.
That's it. You could charge people to officiate their weddings when they inevitably stop being solo. There's a reversal right there. Boom. Monetization strategy.
That's very fun. Okay. That's, I like that idea. I'm glad I'm starting to hear these there's a kind of these themes that are kind of coming up here. And so one is this idea of teamwork, right? The other one is risk, and the other
teamwork with the teams you choose. You curate and cultivate that team, not just walking into a random corporation hoping they have 500 people that are going to make sense with you. Being, I think, really intentional with who you surround yourself with is what I would add to that teamwork
I think that's
concept.
good. And the other one is money, capital. So there's human capital and then there's capital. And how, both on the side of being able to pay the bills. Like no one, I don't want to, I know people are going to fail. And I think that's okay. Like you have to accept the fact that there might be failure in order to succeed. What I don't want are failures that ruin people.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I don't think there's anything wrong with failing and trying again and failing and trying again. The best predictor of a good idea is the number of ideas you come up with. I just don't want people to destroy their lives as a result of this. And so this issue of money is one that you need a plan for.
I mean, though it would be a very clever tack to suggest entrepreneurship to more people. That way they break up with their significant others because of the stress of it. And boom, now you've got more listeners to solo at the same time. Yeah, we figured you out, McGraw.
The nice thing is I think that there's like a never-ending supply of single people. And
there's new ones entering the market every day.
And there's not enough. The thing that makes solo work is there's not enough. It's not that there's plenty of single people. It's that there's not enough resources for single people.
And no one's talking about what you're talking about.
Yes.
I think also people, just want somebody to give them permission to live the life they know they already want.
Thank you.
Love
and just
that.
to say it's okay to want this.
And to be unapologetic about what you're like, what is wrong? Like, again, if you're going to live a non-traditional life, if you're going to not see being single as a liminal space, what are you going to do with that time and energy and those resources?
Live a remarkable life. No, live a remarkable life.
Okay, listen to her. She's
Instagram
smarter.
says the social media guy.
All right.
I know you're much more than a social media guy.
God bless you.
Darwin, third
and final tip,
Final
which I think we're speaking slowly now. Third tip.
Please go.
So, in short, it's in a world designed for parity. I think it pays to take unconventional approaches across the board. And by the way, you could apply this advice to the dating world as well. But when it comes to entrepreneurship and frankly, building these businesses, if everybody is trying to tackle the same problems from the same angles and everybody's figured out that their customer acquisition strategy is trying to optimize Facebook ads towards new customers and Google and SEO towards people who've already shared intent for your product, and maybe I'll manage another social channel that seems obviously applicable to my industry. Well, every one of your competitors is doing the exact same thing.
Yes.
I don't want to compete in that race. I want to figure out the blue ocean where the other sharks haven't figured out it's a great hunting ground yet. And Peter, sort of you were alluding to earlier, we had a big change in Phantom where we were working with predominantly Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter to build audiences and to monetize for our clients. And then we realized, but if we went further downstream, and it took us about 300 apps before we discovered Vine and broke Vine before anyone. That's where the biggest change in our business occurred. We did the same thing with a platform called Twitch. I think in general, you can't just keep tackling these ideas from the same approaches you're seeing everybody else take. And I like the idea of the reversal and trying to do what's the dumbest way to tackle this business, because you know what? At least it might be novel and there might be an opportunity that's not cultivated that's yours for the taking. And if I were to try to synergize all three of my advices into one story, I'm going to come back to how I got my start in the industry. So, tip number one was stop waiting for permission and just create or demand the job you want. Number two was tell people exactly what you envision for yourself and ask for their help in achieving that vision. And number three, in a world designed for parity, how do you take an unconventional approach? Well, I graduated from a school called University of Denver that is not famous in any way because we don't have a football team, but in all the ways unrelated to football, it's actually an incredible school that often punches above its weight class. And one of the things it's responsible for is an alumni named Bill Daniel, who more or less created and cultivated the cable TV industry, which is why the School of Business at DU is called the Daniel School of Business. And I knew graduating, I wanted to move into digital TV, and I wanted to create all of the opportunities that had happened within the cable TV space digitally. And my senior thesis basically was a paper that predicted everything YouTube did for the first 8 years of its existence. I could not get the one company I had on my radar to hire me, which is called Mania TV. They just coincidentally happened to be based out of Denver. A lot of early eBay investors had invested, and essentially they had a MySpace platform and a YouTube platform and a 24/7 live stream in 2005. They were way ahead of everyone on so many levels. And then they hired my favorite comedian, a Canadian named Tom Green, who used to have a show on MTV called The Tom Green Show, but who had been basically radio silent for years because he had just sort of been pissed with the media. And they basically came to him and said, we'll set up a studio for you in your house. No rules, no censorship. You do whatever show you want. And I remember watching this go down and just being like, I can't believe I'm not a part of this. So on episode 3, he had had a few drinks and he decided to give out his home phone number.
Oh my gosh.
And immediately I was like, okay, this is the moment. So I call the phone number. A producer picks up, asks me a few questions, and is like, I think I'm going to let you talk to Tom during the show. And I was like, yes, you are. So he puts me on with Tom, who has a guest named Bobby Badfingers. This was the first season of America's Got Talent. I think Bobby Badfingers was a finalist. And we have a conversation that covers an array of topics. I remember tequila being discussed. And then finally, I asked Bobby and Tom for help in getting a job from Mania TV. And Tom goes, wait, do you live in Denver? I'm like, yes. He's like, of course we're getting you a job. And the next day, the head of productions, Richard Ayub, who's still a great friend and mentor today, called me up and was like, well, I guess you're coming in for an interview. And this approach to me takes all three of those tips and wraps it into one. Number one, I did not wait for Mania TV to give me permission because clearly they weren't even responding to my resumes.
Yes.
They weren't returning my calls. I found a way that forced them to have to bring me into the fold. Number two, I was very clear with what I wanted. I asked Tom for this help. He gave it to me. And same thing was true when Richard brought me into Mania TV. He said, do you want a show or what are you trying to do? And I said, I just want to help you build the empire. And so he put me in a position to help them build from a much more behind the curtain sense, which was really, really transformative for me. And then, of course, in a world where every other person competing for this job that didn't exist, from the person who didn't know that they should give you help, how do I stand out from the people who are sending resumes and who are just making phone calls and doing interviews? And I found this unconventional way that nobody could forget, that nobody could deny. And obviously it worked out. And with that show, with that opportunity that I built at Mania TV, I parlayed that into my first job in TV with the Dr. Phil show, which I then parlayed into my first job in TV news, where I built a report called Kurt the Cyber Guy, which became the most watched tech broadcast of all time, and then parlayed that, in a sense, into the agency I've had now for almost 10 years.
That is an amazing story.
Great story.
That is fantastic.
There's two.
Thanks, Tom.
This reminds me.
Can we get in the show notes this conversation? Is it recorded? Do you have access to it?
Do you have? Is there some?
You know what? I definitely have at least like a 30 or 45 second clip. I don't have the whole 10 minutes, but I do have a clip.
I'll put it
That
in the
would be fun
exhibits.
to
It'd be
see.
great.
Sure.
This reminds me of two quick anecdotes. So one is there's this guy. His name is Naval. He's known as the Angel Philosopher. I know that both
CEO of Angels List.
Yes,
as well.
That's right. And Darwin and I are a fan of this guy, and he has this thing where he's like, if you want to build a company, you want to start an entrepreneurial venture, he's like, tell people. He's like, tell them what you want to do.
People get so precious.
Yeah.
They think that their ideas are so special and unique that the second someone else hears them, that person's instantly a billionaire.
Ideas
or
are
something.
cheap.
100%.
Yeah.
Ideas are cheap. But what he says about this is like, if you tell your coworkers, like, I'm going to start a new business and everything, after 3 months, they're going to be like, hey, I thought you were going to start a business. What are you still doing here?
Right.
And so there's even that level of accountability. You were going to say something?
Well, this idea of asking what you want and putting it out there. I sit on the board for an organization called Naturally Boulder, and it's for the natural products industry. And we're trying to revamp our networking events. And I said, when you go to a networking event, how are you doing? How's business? Oh, everything's great. We just got into Kroger. We just got into Target. We blah, blah. Okay, what's really happening?
That's exactly right.
You're shitting your pants for some reason or another. And you're putting on this air of everything is awesome because that's what you think people want to hear. So we just had a networking event last Monday, and what we did is...
Sounds like a reversal's coming.
Right on your name tag, I have to offer, and another name tag, I need.
That's
Love
nice.
that.
So it was this idea of everyone in the room has something to offer and everyone in the room needs something. And so how can we put these people together and be, the power of vulnerability? Talk about the struggles and how you need help and not just, yay, I just got into Target, my product's into Target.
That's great.
And by the way, every business, whether it's a $1 trillion company like Microsoft or a startup that's, just being built in someone's garage, everybody needs something. There's no business on earth that does not need a lot of help with something.
Right.
Indeed. The other anecdote is actually from Julie's bonus mom. So Sheila Paxton, who has been serving as a mentor for me very generously. And she told me the story. So, I have a lot of MBA students and undergraduate business students who want to get jobs and ask me to look at their resume and so on. And I always push them to be more bold in their resume. Not in terms of embellishing, but in terms of at least visually making this thing stand out. And the reason is, and this is a good segue into my tip. And before that, I want to just say thank you for sharing that story, Darwin, because I think that's a great show don't tell
very inspirational
moment. So Sheila wanted this job. I can't remember the exact details for it, and maybe it was with Mattel or some toy company or whatnot. And so rather than sending her resume in, she sent this enormous package. And in the package was the car, the toy that they were selling. And in this driver's seat was a doll with Sheila's face on it. And in the passenger seat was her resume.
It started off pretty creepy, but it landed in a nice place.
But it was impossible to ignore. And I was like, you got the job, didn't you? She goes, yeah, of course I got the job.
No doubt.
So
Pete, we teach students to mail it in. We teach students from grade 1 to whenever they graduate.
Play by the rules.
Play by the rules. Here's what I've set for you to do. And as long as you've done that,
boxes,
that's enough.
That's exactly right. And that doesn't translate into the world of business. It works in the world of government where you're a bureaucrat, but it doesn't work in the world of business.
I think it would work in business if when people were hiring, they just took, okay, we have 100 candidates. If they just randomly selected one, that approach would be just fine. But they're not. They're going to take either the most impressive or the most novel, or ideally both. Mm-hmm. That's the person that's going to get hired or going to get the opportunity. It's never the person that looks equally good as the other 75 people.
There's no reason
applied.
to choose them. Yeah, there's no reason to choose them. So I'll tell you a failed story about this. I had I was trying to sell Shtick to business to a traditional publisher. And so my previous lit agent is no longer a lit agent, and my previous publisher told me in no uncertain terms that this was a small idea.
They're dead to me now.
Right.
And so I was hustling to get a lit agent, and I found someone who was sort of interested, but didn't see this as like a big advanced kind of book, being a little bit, it's a niche book, and I can agree with that. And but I was like, I'm going to go a traditional route and see how it goes. So I was having a hard time getting his attention, like he wasn't responding to emails and stuff like that. So I bought ribbon cutting scissors that were 3 feet long, enormous, with red handles. Yeah. And I had engraved on it, I said, let's publish a book that will cut through the clutter.
Nice.
And I mailed it to his office. I immediately got an email from him. And he actually did take the next step and tried to approach some publishers. They passed. They're dead to me. And so then I immediately pivoted to create the book on my own terms. And I spent the money out of my own pocket.
But by the way, I love that no matter what happens with the bold approach, either A, I do get the result I want, or B, at least I get the quick no.
That's exactly right.
It forces them into a position, you cannot deny this, you're going to have to deal with me right now, and I'm cool either way. I want a quick yes or a quick no, but I don't want to wait for another 5 months on the return email that's never ever going to come. That's why I love it.
I had wasted enough time with the traditional, and I like immediately pivoted. And then everything took off from there. And so I've assumed the risk rather than a publisher. And but I have everything that a normal publisher gives, which is great design, great editorial work, a great audio book, it's going to be on Amazon, the whole gig. So my tip is called create a chasm. And so this is close to your unconventional approach, I think, Darwin. So every other week, some comedian's in trouble for a joke that he or she told on Twitter or in a comedy club. And my response is, you shouldn't bother complaining because they're not going to stop. Because as long as the audience in front of them is laughing, they don't care what the rest of the world thinks, because jokes are valuable to a joke is valuable to one group of people and not valuable to another group of people. And if you try to make a joke that's valuable to both, you make a joke that's not valuable to both. That is in a world of people who want hot tea and a world of people who want iced tea. If you give them warm tea, you make no one happy.
I mean, imagine if Julie and Rancher were trying to target vegans and vegetarians and make sure that they liked the sentiment of their marketing or their branding. It would make zero sense. That's never going to be your customer.
Right.
And of course, they don't like your product. It's good they don't like your product.
That's exactly right. When people hate you,
someone loves you.
That's right. Well, here's the thing. If someone loves you, then certainly someone hates you. Now, if someone hates you, you
may just be universally
that's right.
hated.
But to get people to love you, you also have to risk having people hate you.
Right.
And so I like this idea of dividing an audience and being very clear about who you are, and Solo was based on that principle, which was that some people aren't going to be happy about this, but you want the people who are happy about it, not to be kind of happy, but to be so happy that they will tell all 3 of their dates in one day.
Right.
Yes,
I mean, you could have an entire podcast, an entire conversation around helping people get comfortable being a polarizing figure, whether that's polarizing on a personal level or on a business level. And the truth is, if there is no polarization, there are no sparks, almost across the board. And people want to be beloved by everyone. And so we sort of form this tofu, generic, warm tea. And then just nobody likes you. It's the equivalent of the founder that you mentioned, Julie, that's just not quite risk adverse, or is too risk adverse rather, where you become this warm tea that's guaranteed to not be used because you are so afraid of making the perfect product that everybody liked at the same time.
So I'm going to give you my favorite Create a Chasm company, and it's a fitness one again, so forgive me. But it's called Barry's Boot Camp. And so if you're from New York or Los Angeles, you probably know Barry's. There's actually one right down the street from me. And I actually went once on a date. Actually,
that's aggressive.
I did. I went on a date. And so Barry's is a lot like Orange Theory. So it has treadmill runs and then floor exercises. So it's an hour-long workout. And it's a good workout. It is intense. But Barry's is different than others. So first of all, it's like working out in a club. So they play music and they play it really loud. So loud, in fact, I went to the front desk and asked for earplugs.
Wow.
You boomer.
And they had them.
They had them.
And so obviously, think about Barry's. Barry's turns down the volume. So, like celebs go there, Jake Gyllenhaal goes there, Kim Kardashian goes there, like beautiful, people go there, young people go there, and they are
not too young, though. It's not creepy.
No, that's true. It's
appropriately
super
young.
Loyal. So you turn down the volume to make me happy, and then you make the customer unhappy.
The rest of those
they're
people.
there because they are energized by the music. Next thing, Barry's is lit in red light. So it's kind of dark, but it's red light. Now, what the average person doesn't realize, but once you're in there, so by the way, all 4 walls are floor to ceiling mirrors, so you can see yourself work out. All of us look fabulous in red light.
That is fun.
This is why it's a red light district, not a purple light district.
That is exactly right. Your skin looks great. It hides blemishes and so on. And so now you're in this gym that gets you results. Your body looks good. Then you're bathed in this red light that makes you look even better. And then people barely wear clothing. Men take their shirts off. You can, as a guy working out in that gym, you can take your shirt off in there. Again, not for everyone.
There's a reason why they don't offer that in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm not sure you want to see those men with their shirt off.
That's fair.
Makes more sense for the
That's
coast.
fair.
Why didn't we do that on our list of things to do while I was here?
To go to Barry's Boot Camp.
And we've worn shirts this entire podcast. It doesn't make any sense.
And we're also under fluorescent lighting. And so you think about it, right? Like you have this lighting, you let people barely wear any clothing, you have this loud music. It's like you're actually at a rave or a dance club or something like that. It's not for everyone, but for the people that Barry's is for, they can't imagine going And he goes, a drop-in session at Barry's is $30.
Wow.
Right? So that's no joke. And so
that's like 4 Chipotles.
That has the opposite, effect. So I like this idea of, can you polarize? Can you be divisive? Can you make people pick a side? And comedians do that all the time. Are you with me or are you against me? And I think that some of the best business, especially the young grassroots scrappy ones, they don't have to be like Coca-Cola and have something for everyone. They don't have to be like Capital One where they have something for everyone. They just need one thing for one group of people in that sense. And so that's my last one.
Well, and I think that kind of full circle brings up the idea of creativity. So those people at Barry's are very creative, thinking outside the box. Don't be a sheep. It's encapsulating a lot of these ideas that we talked about into one. And I think, when people are thinking about, should I start a business? Should I be an entrepreneur? I think a lot of it is how much out of the box thinking can you do in this creative way that Darwin got this job and Sheila sent the doll in the vehicle. I mean, I have an example of doing that very same thing.
Let's end with that.
Okay. So when you sell products to Whole Foods, there's 10 different regions, and now it's different that Amazon has taken over, but at that time, each region made their own decision of what products they would carry. So my products were in 3 or 4 Whole Foods regions, and of course I wanted to get into the rest. And the buyers wouldn't return my emails. I wasn't getting any traction or any response. And do you remember those flip recorders? It was just a little video recorder.
Yeah, I famously lost a flip recorder that I had pranked Bill Cosby into thinking Dr. Phil was calling him, and I had to bury it because it was a big no-no. But man, I wish I had it now.
Big time.
Oh, yeah. So you remember the flip. So what I did is I recorded, I went on some, bought a bunch of secondhand flips, recorded myself. My name is Julie. This is my company. This is why I would like you to consider carrying my products. I put it in a FedEx envelope and mailed it. You always open a FedEx cardboard.
Absolutely.
You get a FedEx cardboard
envelope. It could
envelope.
be Morpheus on
You're
the other
gonna
line.
open it.
Yes.
So I sent those, and I heard back from all the buyers except for one. One told me he got nervous and he thought somebody had something to blackmail him
That's so
with.
funny.
And that they were sending the flip to show him that they were going to blackmail him. So he watched it to see what it was. But anyway, just these ideas.
If it works and it's dumb, it still works.
Exactly. Right. So anyway, just being creative, thinking outside the box, taking
great.
risks.
And I think one of the things to add to this is that, you don't need an entrepreneurial mindset to just create a new business. An entrepreneurial mindset can help you get ahead within the organization you have. You just have to be a little slippery and smart about how you execute these things. So I've been given, we're not going to tape any bonus material here. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to thank my guests. But if you do want to stick around, I've made a decision in order to celebrate and help promote Shtick to Business. I'm going to separately tape a little bonus material, and I'm going to take you through some of the ideas in the final chapter of Shtick to Business.
Wow.
Yes.
Nice.
So if you want, stick around for a little bonus material on Take a Bigger Stage. And with that, I want to say, Darwin Metzger, thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete.
Julie Nervelli, thank you so much. And to all the listeners out there, we wish you the best. Send us your questions, especially, I'm sure we'll come back to this notion of entrepreneurship and what you want us to answer. And with that, I say thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you.
See you on the internet.
Welcome back for the bonus material. Julie and Darwin have moved on, but I wanted to chat with you briefly about one of the lessons from my new book, Shtick to Business. Now, the book's not about being funny like a comedian. It's about thinking funny, that is, thinking differently. And in it, I present serious business lessons based on my observations of the practices and perspectives of the world's funniest people. Many of those observations have informed this podcast and its development. I'm going to give you a brief personal story that shows up in Chapter 7. The title of the chapter is Take a Bigger Stage, where I talk about moving to a bigger place, pursuing a bigger platform, and taking a bigger perspective. And I want to talk to you about taking a bigger perspective. So comedians ask why when writing their jokes, but they ask why not when living their lives. And inspired by that observation, here's a personal story. So as a professor, I go to academic conferences, and in order to make these trips a lot less boring, I host a dinner, typically on the last night of the conference. And I invite a group of professional friends who have become personal friends. And the dinner's filled with a really impressive group of people. These are professors at elite business schools. They've gotten their PhDs from elite private universities. They're accomplished researchers and teachers. And some, I suspect, will go on to become deans or even university presidents. So I limit the seating to 8 people because you can't get any larger than that and maintain one conversation. And I'm a tyrant. So there's all these rules in order to make the dinner run smoothly. And the group, they like to complain about the rules, but deep down they appreciate them. And they've affectionately dubbed it the McGraw dinner. And so I do a lot of talking at this dinner. You probably won't be surprised having listened to this podcast. But one year I decided, and actually based upon what I had been observing in the world of comedy, I decided to sit and listen, just be quiet and listen. And I listened to the way the table talked about their professional challenges. Now, if you're a professor at one of these top schools, there are a lot of challenges. Acceptance rates at the academic journals are below 10%. The students are demanding. The workload is withering. You know, there's a saying in academia about how flexible the job is. You can work whatever 80 hours you want. So I noticed something that was striking about how the group talked about their professional challenges. The group spoke about these things as they were kind of irritants, things that were getting in the way of the great things that they were accomplishing. These were mosquitoes to be smashed, squashed, waved away. And what I realized was that this group of people, this accomplished group of people, had something called a promotion focus. That is, they were focused on achieving success. Now, psychologists have another term, the reverse of this, and that is prevention focused. And I grew up prevention focused. You know, I was in a family with a single mom. She didn't go to college. No one in my family ever got a graduate degree, let alone become a professor. But it wasn't terrible. You know, I like to say we were food stamps poor, but not welfare poor. You know, I was a public school kid. I went to state universities. In a prevention-focused world, though, you want to avoid failure. And in a promotion-focused world, you want to achieve success. So prevention-focused people, they don't want a big house. They just want to keep their tiny townhouse, you know, the one that I grew up in. And you don't want fame and success. You just want to hold on to your modest job. Now, both groups can be successful, but for very different reasons, and their feelings are really quite different. So promotion-focused people, they study hard for an exam because they want to get an A, and prevention-focused people study hard for an exam because they want to avoid an F. And as I was sitting at that table with all these promotion-focused people, I started to feel like an outsider, and I'm hosting the damn thing. And then at that point in time, I remember thinking, why not me? A life-changing moment. Why not me? Okay, sure, they went to better schools, but here I am sitting with them. They see me as a peer, as a friend, as a professional colleague. And I thought, maybe I can learn to think like they do. I can learn to think bigger. I can take a bigger perspective. And ever since that moment, I've worked hard to build my awareness in how I think. And if I catch myself trying to avoid failure, I try to focus on achieving success. That's one of the fascinating things I think about comics. They think, why not me? Why can't I go on and become great at this incredibly challenging task? Why not me? Why can't I be the person who sells out big theaters and has Netflix specials? And their behavior then follows that up. They take risks. They live in a fearless way. They live unapologetically. They end up pursuing a creative, innovative path in life. I think that many of the themes talked about, the tips that my guest gave forth today, I think have that kind of flavor. And with that in mind, I obviously invite you to look at other lessons that might be in the book. But most importantly, I invite you to ask the question, why not me? And hopefully it'll spur you to think about focusing on more achievement rather than avoiding failure, and that it leads you to be more creative and more innovative, whether it be in your professional life or your personal life. Thanks for listening. It's really been a pleasure. I'm having a great time doing this podcast, and I really appreciate you. Cheers.
Thank